The 2022 F1 season is over, and so that means it's time to rank the drivers based on their performances this season. This one could get interesting, so let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Number 20, Nicholas Latifi, non-mover. First up is a non-mover as Nicholas Latifi sits 20th on this list. At one point during this half of the season, Latifi was 21st in a 22-driver championship, after Nick de Vries subbed in for Latifi's teammate at Monza and scored a couple of points. Personally, I think it was that weekend that summarises Latifi's poor season the best. Monza was a great opportunity for Williams to give their car a chance at getting into the points. This year, the team have taken advantage of high-speed tracks, going for super low downforce setups. At Spa, Albon was able to utilise his car's straight-line speed to defend from DRS overtakes, so there was a great chance for Williams to repeat these achievements in Italy. Their weekend was tough, with Albon not available for the weekend running, and so there was more pressure on Latifi's shoulders and an opportunity for super sub Nick de Vries. But that weekend, de Vries was the driver that secured 2 points for the team, with Latifi finishing down in 15th position. Latifi did score 2 points since that Grand Prix with a good performance in Japan, where he made the call to switch to intermediate tyres based on his experience from the practice sessions. But by that stage, it was too little too late for Latifi, who was already counting down the races until what will likely be the end of his Formula 1 career. Number 19, Daniel Ricciardo, down 1. Ricciardo next, and the Australian driver is another one that has left the sport. McLaren have terminated his contract early after 2 years of poor performance. This season has continued to expose Ricciardo's weakness, with the Australian driver unable to adapt his driving style to either of his 2 McLaren cars. I think this failed driver move is a real warning sign for teams that might look for a new driver to take on their car, and McLaren in particular should know what kind of driving style will suit their car going forwards. Ricciardo's 2022 season did have glimpses of brilliance, just like in 2021. His performance in Mexico this year to come back through the field springs to mind, even if he did manage to hit Tsunoda in the process. But overall, Ricciardo's time at McLaren can only be defined as a failure. Number 18, Lance Stroll, up 1. Stroll sits in 18th position after a season where he did improve with the car. The Aston Martin was one of the fastest cars to develop through this season, which is a sign that the investment in the team is working while also maintaining the Force India DNA, which tended to develop fast each year despite operating on a smaller budget. My problem with Stroll's season is that while he was often close to Vettel in the races and on the cusp of points, he was decidedly behind the German driver on the whole. His defensive move on his teammate in the Brazil sprint was simply dangerous, and it's these types of moves that we shouldn't be seeing from a driver with 6 years of experience on the grid. Stroll did have moments of brilliance, like other drivers lower down on this list, with his 6th place in Singapore securing crucial points for Aston Martin's season, but on the whole this year it was a poor showing from Stroll, and I think he may be in for a tough season against Fernando Alonso in 2023. Number 17, Mick Schumacher, down 2. Schumacher is down 2 positions compared to his mid-season ranking. At that point in the year, he was doing well to prove himself in what was a significantly better car than he had in 2021. Many gave Schumacher a bit more time to learn from Kevin Magnuson than they might have done for another driver in their second year in the sport. But ultimately, Schumacher failed to compete with Magnuson on the whole this year. What I found surprising when writing this script was the fact that Schumacher has only had 2 point-scoring finishes this season, and those results came in back-to-back races from Silverstone to Austria. Admittedly, Magnuson has struggled in the second half as well, as Haas lost out due to them being unable to develop their car through the year. But for me, Schumacher never showed he was able to achieve strong results from a weak car, something that you have to prove when you race for these backmarker teams. Number 16, Yuki Tsunoda, non-mover. It feels like Yuki Tsunoda has had a very anonymous season, which in a way is a good thing for the Japanese driver. Last year, his aggressive radio calls and his frequent mistakes resulted in a disappointing year. But for me, I think this season has been an improvement for him. But the AlphaTauri car itself has been significantly worse relative to their rivals. The team ended up 9th in the constructors' standings, and it was rare that Tsunoda had the chance to prove himself, particularly towards the end of the year where the car seemed to regress relative to their rivals. Tsunoda achieved 4 point-scoring finishes this year, with 3 of those coming in the opening 6 rounds. He also ended up 3 positions and 11 points behind his teammate, which is a much smaller gap than we saw last season between these 2 drivers. I think it's reasonable to expect this gap to have closed, especially considering the car isn't as strong as last year, But I think that Tsunoda's season as a whole has been better, but not exceptional in 2022. Number 15, Pierre Gasly, up 2. Gasly next, and I think he's also struggled with the AlphaTauri car not being as competitive as it has been over the last few years. His performances this year were disappointing, and he's actually accrued more penalty points on his licence than any other driver, and is actually at risk of getting a race ban. Of course, with a poor car, it makes it far more difficult to prove yourself, and apparently the AlphaTauri car is still significantly overweight, which is obviously slowing it down. But fundamentally, once it was announced that Gasly was moving to Alpine next year, it feels like his performances went downhill as well. He made many errors, which has contributed to him accruing those penalty points, such as dropping too far behind the safety car in the US Grand Prix, speeding under the safety car in Japan, and pushing Stroll off the circuit in Mexico. Many of those errors are avoidable, and it's disappointing to see an experienced driver making these kinds of errors. But I would add that I feel Gasly has been penalised more harshly than many others on the grid this season. Pierre Gasly did achieve a few point-scoring finishes with his poor car in the second half, with a string of 3-point-scoring results in 4 races between Belgium and Singapore, and I think that's a testament to how talented he is, and the fact that he certainly deserves his spot next year. Let's hope he finds his form again when he joins Alpine next season. Number 14, Zhou Guanyu, non-mover. Zhou Guanyu has had an unfortunate season in my opinion. At the beginning of the year, the Alfa Romeo car was strong relative to their rivals, but Zhou was getting up to speed in Formula 1 and not getting the maximum from his car yet. Once Zhou was up to speed and getting more comfortable in the car, the Alfa Romeo's pace advantage had been eroded by their competitors, and so Zhou has been unable to prove that improvement from a point-scoring perspective. But I don't think this should stand against him. Zhou is clearly a talented driver with a lot of potential, and with Valtteri Bottas as his teammate, he has the potential to develop in the Alfa Romeo setup. I think next season will be critical for the Chinese driver's career as he looks to extend his time in the sport, which could be tough based on some of the other drivers available for 2024 already. But on the whole, I would say it's been a good start for Zhou's time in Formula 1. Number 13, Alex Albon, non-mover. Alex Albon's first year with Williams has been a great success. He's shown his talent in a car that is further down the order than his 2020 Red Bull, and with less pressure on his shoulders, he's thrived. He's been rewarded for his performances with a multi-year contract with his new team, and I think he'll continue to grow into that lead driver role. Albon's races have been characterised by wanting to take risks, and he has done well whenever the car is allowed, and even when it hasn't allowed, he's been the driver to knock on the door of those points-paying positions. Albon's qualifying results have been particularly strong this season, out-qualifying his teammate 19 times to just 2 for Latifi. That in itself is a great achievement, particularly considering he was coming into the team that Latifi had been in for 2 years before. Number 12, Valtteri Bottas, down 3. I feel harsh dropping Bottas down 3 positions as it's clearly the lack of car development that's prevented him from scoring more points this year after that brilliant start. But with the other drivers proving themselves, Bottas has stalled, hence the drop on this ranking. On the whole, I think Bottas has done a great job to reinvent himself in the post-Mercedes era of his career. He's become a great mentor for Zhou and is clearly a valuable member of the Alfa Romeo team. His performances in 2022 have been very strong, and I expect he's delivered on the team's expectations as he capitalised on the strong car the team offered him at the beginning of the year. Number 11, Kevin Magnuson, non-mover. Kevin Magnuson has had an unexpected season. At the beginning of the first pre-season test, he wasn't even due to be racing in the sport, but Haas gave him that opportunity to get back on the grid, and he seized that opportunity with both hands. Early on, the Haas car was strong, and Magnuson ensured he capitalised on those point-scoring possibilities as much as possible through the first half of the year. In the latter stage of the season, Magnuson dropped off along with the Haas car, and strong results were few and far between. The highlight though has got to be Magnuson's pole position in Brazil, where he capitalised on the changeable conditions and the Haas team's pitbox position to ensure he was the first car out on track to maximise the conditions before the rain fell. In the end, that result was short-lived and he scored just a single point from the sprint, and while that wasn't critical in their fight with AlphaTauri, it ensured they had a bit of a gap to that team to secure 8th in the standings. Next year, Magnuson will be up against Hülkenberg in that team, which will be an interesting matchup for 2023. Before we move into the top 10 of this ranking, if you're enjoying this video so far, please leave a like and make sure to subscribe while you're there. Number 10, Carlos Sainz, down 2. Carlos Sainz in 10th, and I've got him down 2 positions compared to the mid-season rank. Sainz has had a difficult year on the whole, with many first lap incidents that impacted his ability to keep up with the frontrunners. I feel it's harsh to drop Sainz down to 10th, but to be honest, in his first year with a car capable of competing for a championship, he's been somewhat disappointing in converting strong results. Going into next season, I think Sainz will need to work on his consistency if he has a car that's capable of competing at the front again. I fear that he wasn't consistent enough this year, and aside from his maiden victory at Silverstone, he was off the pace, and even lost a position in the championship standings to George Russell in the Mercedes. Sure, Sainz has had a lot of bad luck, particularly with first lap incidents, but next year I'm sure he'll want to prove himself capable of competing for a championship if he has the car to allow it. Number 9. Esteban Ocon, up 1. Esteban Ocon is in 9th on this list, and I think the French driver can be pleased with his results in 2022. He managed to beat Fernando Alonso over the course of the season, albeit with a more reliable car than the Spanish driver. Ocon has had a relatively quiet season, but he managed to consistently achieve point-scoring finishes with 16 in the top 10 out of the 22 races. Alpine were in a close battle with McLaren all season, and I think Ocon did well to lead that team in the point standings. The highlights include a 4th position in Japan and a 5th place finish in Austria, both of which were excellent results. But as I've said before, Ocon's strength this season has been his ability to finish in the points on a consistent basis. Going into next year, it will be a fascinating battle between Ocon and Gasly. This year, Ocon's antics with Alonso meant the pair had a fractious relationship, and we already know that the French pairing have a troubled past. Number 8. Sergio Perez, down 1. Perez is in 8th, and the Red Bull number 2 wasn't as critical this season as he was in 2021. I think the Mexican driver has performed well this year relative to last season, but he was simply unable to match the performance of his teammate. I don't think anyone expects Perez to be on the heels of Verstappen, but there were times this season where he seemed to be unable to get close to the other frontrunners. Perez did achieve 2 race wins this year, with strong performances in Monaco and Singapore, and that's an improvement on last year's single race win. But the car this year was far more dominant, and there were periods of time, particularly in the second half, where Perez just seemed lost. Number 7. Sebastian Vettel, up 5. Vettel's final half season of his career was brilliant to watch. It felt like the Aston Martin driver found his form and ended up scoring more than double the points of his teammate. There's no doubt that Vettel's feedback to the team will have contributed to the team's success this season, as they developed their car well from one of the backmarkers through to being a car that could fight for the points on a semi-regular basis. This improvement was probably the best in the midfield, and Aston Martin went from 9th in the standings at the halfway point to 7th, and were very close to Alfa Romeo in 6th. I think there were some elements of regret for Sebastian Vettel's decision to retire, but considering he was just about fighting for points in the last few races, I think he wasn't able to compete where he wanted to on the F1 grid. I think Vettel was one of the best performers of 2022, and it's a shame to see him go. Number 6. Charles Leclerc, down 4. Leclerc comes in 6th, and he's down 4 positions from the mid-season break. At that point in the year, there was a small chance that he could compete with Verstappen, but since then his championship fight was lacklustre. It was partly down to his own mistakes, such as his crash in France, but it was also down to the team's dreadful strategy decisions throughout 2022, and the disappointing development curve that they've been on this year. Leclerc's first title challenge ended before it really began, and I think there's a lot that Leclerc will learn from this season. There were 2 key achievements for the Monegasque driver this year though, the first of which was achieving the most pole positions in this season. Leclerc's talent on a Saturday is undeniable, and that will put him in a good position should Ferrari be more competitive on a Sunday next year. The other achievement for the Ferrari number 1 is that he managed to secure 2nd in the championship order, a strong result considering the way the season went for that team. For me, Leclerc's key weakness is not being able to direct the team through the races. It's an area that he can work on through the winter, and something that I think he should be able to learn from his teammate. Number 5. Lewis Hamilton, down 1. Hamilton is down 1 position in 5th, but I have to say this is more because of the other drivers' strong performances as opposed to Hamilton not performing. This year has been Hamilton's most difficult season in the sport so far. He's been beaten by his teammate, something that only 2 drivers have achieved before in the same machinery, and not only this, but Hamilton has lost his record of achieving at least 1 race win and a pole position in each season he's competed in, a feat that his teammate managed to achieve this year. Of course, the W13 is one of the worst car Hamilton has driven relative to his opponents, and the Mercedes has had some significant problems this year which they've been working hard to resolve. Reportedly, Hamilton was a critical part in that testing as he tried different setups through the early stages, which is perhaps a justification for the British driver being behind his teammate. In the second half of the year, Hamilton did find his form again and was consistently ahead of Russell for a long period of time. There have been signs that this partnership could be competing directly with each other more than Bottas and Hamilton did throughout their time together as teammates. On the whole though, it's a season for Hamilton to forget, and whilst there were certainly moments of brilliance, I think he'll want to put it behind him, but there are signs it could be better for the team next year. Number 4, Fernando Alonso, up 1. Alonso's season has been characterised by poor reliability and bad luck. His relationship with Alpine and his teammate has deteriorated over the second half of 2022, but despite this he's been able to secure strong results for his team. I think if the luck had fallen a different way this year, Alonso would have comfortably finished ahead of Esteban Ocon, and the deterioration of his relationship with Alpine was the centre of one of the biggest news stories of 2022, as he left the team to move to Aston Martin. An interesting move, but one that can see him secure his future over several years. But it'll be interesting to see how he gets on in that new setup. Number 3, George Russell, non-mover. George Russell is in third and he managed to maintain the great performances that enabled him to beat Lewis Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship. To top it off, Russell was the Mercedes driver that managed to secure that all-important win in Brazil, which will give the team a huge morale boost heading into the off-season. Russell's first year in the Mercedes is a strong benchmark for his performances up against his new teammate, and if Mercedes are able to continue this development trajectory, it feels like he could continue to challenge Lewis Hamilton at the front. It'll be fascinating to see how this driver pairing works when they're more regularly fighting for race wins. The Bottas-Hamilton partnership worked really well as Hamilton was always ahead, and after this year, it's clear that Russell is a stronger challenge for the 7-time champion. Number 2, Lando Norris, up 4. Lando Norris's season has been really strong in 2022. He's carried the McLaren team, given Daniel Ricciardo was disappointing to say the least. The fact that McLaren were able to keep their fight for fourth in the championship until the last couple of races is all due to Norris's consistent performances throughout 2022. Not only this, but these results put more pressure on his experienced teammate as their differential was the biggest on the grid this year. Norris was the only driver to secure a podium finish when not driving for one of the top 3 teams, and that's certainly a notable achievement, especially when you consider the result came at Imola, which is when the McLaren car was temperamental and the team was struggling to get it up to speed. For me, I think Norris's season was the second best of any driver, and it raises the question of how long he'll be willing to wait for McLaren to give him a championship winning car. Number 1, Max Verstappen, non-mover. And finally, it's of course Max Verstappen who takes the top spot on this list. The Dutchman has won his second World Championship in as many years, and I think this is perhaps the beginning of a dominant era for the driver. Verstappen's championship this year was far more comfortable than in 2021, and that is because his mistakes were few and far between, and he managed to remain calm despite some early reliability issues. The points gap in the championship this year is a clear indicator of just how strong this season has been for Red Bull and Max Verstappen, hence he's clearly deserving of the top spot on this list. So there we have it, my driver rankings for the 2022 season. Let me know who you'd move in the comments and make sure to hit the subscribe button for more post-season content to come.